episode 125 of Drunk on Bro, but I got Mark here with me. Mark, welcome in. We're going to talk Sixers a little bit, little Flyers later on, but welcome in, brother. How we doing?
Good, man. Same old. Just been keeping an eye on this off-season stuff. It's been pretty interesting. So it's all I've been up to. I don't have a whole lot not a whole lot going on with me.
I hear you. Listen, there's been a lot and not a lot all at the same time.
Yeah.
And we can just kind of start with the idea that like we know what's going on with Harden, right? He's kind of the news outlets have kind of wavered back and forth whether or not that deal is in place, not in place, in place, not in place. And then you've got Harden that basically has come out a little bit and go, this is it. I want out. So my thought on this is like, I know Daryl Morey sees him as a huge asset, but to me, you got to move on. You cannot go into camp with a disgruntled player because we've seen this James Harden novel play. We've seen the book, the sequel, the movie. We know how this is going to play out. And we don't need him to pull the fat suit out of storage and put that on. So in my mind, you got to take whatever deal gets you the best return and do that before the season starts.
Yeah. I agree with that. This has been, as you said, and that's really a great point, that we've seen this stuff play out before with James, and just how it and even for me, I looking at these rumors and things like that, like apparently is he angling to get to LA? Is that the play for him?
I think he's kind of made it known that like it's very similar to the stance that Dame Lillard has put out. Like it's like for Harden, it's LA or bust. For Dame, it's Miami or bust. And I think after Utah, I want to kind of put a little bigger picture on this. But yeah, it's for Harden, it's kind of LA or nothing.
Yeah, and I just like previously, because we've heard this all year, right? Throughout the season, it was whenever that story broke.
Right around Christmas time.
Yeah, it was right around Christmas time, and it was he wanted to go back to Houston. And I remember saying to people, anybody who'd listen to me, that anytime I chat at hoops with anybody that I knew, I was like, Houston doesn't make a lot of sense to me, other than the fact that he had been there for a long time before, but they're not they're not close to a title.
Right.
And then I look at LA, like I look at the Clippers, they have that new stadium open up soon, so they probably want some butts in those seats. But at the same time, I don't see how they're any closer to a title either. And if it's really about winning, which I don't think it is for James, and I hate to make those, I hate to make those assumptions about players because I don't know them personally, but everything that you look at throughout his career, I think we look at James as, a prolific scorer, right? One of the better scorers the last 20, 25 years in the game of basketball. And but it doesn't, at some point, the narrative starts to be shaped around your legacy. And I mean, I actually happen to like James Harden. I know based on what I've written for Fired Up and what we've talked about on this show, you may not know it, but I actually like James Harden quite a bit. And it's like, and think all those things about him, prolific scorer and all. But the lasting impression I'm going to have of him in that Sixers uniform is that 1,000-yard stare that he had at the end of that Game 7 in Boston. Yeah. And that's happened a lot in his career.
Yeah, it seems like that's his MO. Like you had the people from LA warning you about like you're going to get a guy who's obscenely productive during the regular season, right? A 20-10 guy, a guy who leads the league in assists, but a guy who just forever doesn't show up in the playoffs, like when it matters most. And to me, Mark, not even Game 7, but for me, it's Game 6. That's what I'll remember, because the Game 6 is where you're on your home court, you're up, you had a chance to put them away with 5 minutes left, and you basically disappear, and you caused your MVP to disappear. Like how Embiid goes 5 minutes without getting the ball. I gotta put listen. I'll put a little bit of that on Embiid, but I got to put a little bit on Harden because it's your job to distribute and get him the ball. And some of that goes to Doc, right? Doc's got to be like, get him the ball. But Doc also has his failures in the playoffs too. I look at this in a much bigger picture. To me, this bigger picture has a lot to do with the players running the league. Mm-hmm. In a sense where like James Harden is limiting the return that the Sixers can get, because if I'm the Clippers, if he wants to come here and he's refusing to go anywhere else, he's either going to be a giant pain in the ass for you, or you're going to have to take a bath and get back whatever we feel like giving you.
Right.
Whether it's Norman Powell or Terrence Mann or Marcus Morris or Clippers picks or whatever it is, mm-hmm. You basically have to take back whatever they're going to give you. And Dame is in the same. Dame put himself in the same spot, right? He and his agent have made it very clear, and his situation is even worse because he just signed that max deal. He's got 3 years left on it, and he's saying it's Miami or nothing, or I'm going to be a giant pain in the ass.
Yeah.
And I think this is the place where I know Adam Silver won't do it. But if you're the commissioner of this league, this is where you have to step in and say, this can't happen.
Right.
We cannot have players demanding to go to specific locations and basically refusing to be a giant pain in the ass otherwise.
Right.
I don't get it. I don't get it from I get that there's a desire to go play places, mm-hmm. But at the same time, your legacy is built on how you perform on the court, and James Harden will always be a phenomenal scorer. Mm-hmm. But not a reliable player in the playoffs.
No. And that's part of his legacy at this point. It's going to become just as much about the failures in the playoffs as much as it's going to be about that prolific scoring. The thing about the Clippers, like that being like, if that's like his end all be all of a destination, other than living in LA and living on the West Coast, I really don't understand the fit there. Like when you think about, like,
I mean, essentially, I guess you pair him with Paul George and you pair him with Kawhi Leonard.
Sure.
And you have a big three of really experienced veteran scorers.
Yeah.
But I'm kind of with you. I don't see, if I'm Paul George and I'm Kawhi Leonard, I want someone who's going to get up and down and get me the ball. Where if you watch that Celtics series with Harden, man, does he dribble the fucking air out of the ball and wait for like the very last second, and then it looks like this chaotic, hot mess to try to get a shot up.
Yeah. And from a basketball perspective, the big three element of it, like I said, they have that new stadium opening up soon. I'm sure that'll sell tickets. I'm sure Harden, Kawhi, and PG look nice on a poster together. But Kawhi's been really banged up. I mean, he's been on the bench more in a clip. He's been in street clothes more than he's been in a Clippers uniform, I think, since he's been there.
Yeah, you're right.
And then PG's got that long laundry list of he's been banged up and nicked up too, and maybe that's what he wants. Maybe he wants to go to LA, and if those guys, he would just as well like to play with them, but if they're not available or aren't healthy enough to play, it'll turn into kind of what his last couple years in Houston were, where it was just kind of like, you guys all stand over here and I'm going to do this stuff with the basketball, you know? And when I don't have any other options and I dish it to you, you better hit this three. It's
Right.
like,
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So
I
otherwise I'm going to
just
get mad. So
yeah.
I
And listen, I'm gonna throw a proposal at you
okay.
because this is the one that I saw, the latest one that I saw, and it involves a different guy from a different team. It's a
Okay.
3-team trade, in which the Sixers end up with Zach LaVine, which is a guy that I really really like and I think would fit really well right next to Maxey, Tobias Harris, and Joel Embiid.
Mm-hmm.
In that trade, the Sixers give up James Harden and Furkan Korkmaz go to the Clippers,
Okay.
which I would be glad to put Korkmaz. I would drive him to LA gladly. And then the Bulls end up with Norman Powell, Terrence Mann, Marcus Morris, and a Clippers first round pick and a Sixers first round pick.
Yeah.
If that deal is on the table, I'm signing whatever I gotta sign. I don't know about you, but like if I can get that guy could be a wing scorer next to Joel Embiid, of which the likes he hasn't had the opportunity to play with.
Yeah. The LaVine thing's interesting. I go back and forth about it. I'm not, and I should preference that by saying I know that his game's really come along in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't seen a whole lot of him play, so I'm not like terribly sure, like for sure that he's like the best fit. I'll take your word for that, though. I mean, I know he could definitely score, um, and the I think I could talk myself into like if you were to work out if you have to deal with the Clippers,
Right.
The Terrence Mann and Norman Powell deal with the picks or whatever. I think if I were Morey and I were the Sixers, maybe that doesn't excite you as much as Zach LaVine, but I think I could talk myself into that. Just working with them straight up for a deal like that.
Okay.
Um,
So if we
because
just take that package,
yeah.
right? Like if you take Zach LaVine out of it
Hmm.
and you just say you trade Harden and Korkmaz to the Clippers
Hmm.
and you get back Norman Powell, Terrence Mann, Marcus Morris, and let's just say 2 picks from the Clippers.
Right. I think I would do that.
Okay.
Norman Powell's I think he could actually help the Sixers.
You would reunite
Um,
him with Nick Nurse.
yeah, he could be reunited with Nick Nurse as well, and I think I would be excited about you know maybe the pieces fit a little bit better, but I think the part that would really excite me about the deal would be getting Terrence Mann in the deal, and that be him and Maxey be my guards, in my
Okay.
starting five. I think I could get excited about that, knowing that they're both young, athletic, and that could be really fun. That could be something that um, uh, they could explore,
Mm-hmm.
and even if we're on the back end of the bell curve of Joel's prime or whatever, I would still feel really excited about. Well, at least we have Maxey and Mann, and they could be our, maybe they're the future
Right.
of the Sixers, and maybe we could stay competitive that way, knowing that we have two young pieces. And then, of course, the picks are always, those are always nice to have, whether they're, to be used in other trades or you're going to make those
Yeah.
picks or whatever. But
At some point, you have to start accumulating those picks back, right? You give a lot of picks up when
mhm,
you traded Ben to Brooklyn.
yeah.
So I don't
And
know.
if,
I like either one of those options
mhm,
specifically because my worry is that if Harden comes in and is a giant pain in the ass, then you have a situation where you could be looking at a not happy Joel Embiid.
yeah.
And that to me is the last thing that this team needs because if you've got Joel Embiid who's not happy and he's looking around going, I'm wasting my prime of what I have, whatever I got left of it. I'm out.
Mhm,
Go find me a spot. And listen, we've heard that the 4-letter network in Connecticut push the Knicks narrative.
Mhm.
We've heard them push the Heat narrative. Like, I don't want to get to that spot, but I think if you bring in basically a repeat of the situation that happened with Ben Simmons, I think you could see an Embiid go, yo, like, go figure something out.
Yeah.
And that's what's scary, because if that happens, then you're right back where you started in those, mid to late 2000s with your Andre Iguodala, Ish Smith process. Like, you're basically putting yourself in that process again. And then you're looking at the next decade of that stuff.
Yeah. And it would be tough to that would be an incredibly tough pill to swallow. And it does, like, that's an apt point by Mike. It does feel like we're getting, it's like, how much longer is this window open? And that's why, as much as I love Maxey, if a deal were to come along where you can get a legitimate star in a deal, everything should be about the Embiid window, the Embiid, like, fulfill this prime, because we don't know how much longer we're going to have with him. I mean, he's already nearing 30. We know big men and how they age and things like that. And
Yeah, I mean, the rumblings with, including Maxey in a deal that would be sent to Portland for Dame, if Dame wasn't such a weirdo. And like, I get it. You want to go to Florida. There's no state tax. You make an extra $20 million.
Yeah,
I get all that.
Sure.
But if I'm Portland, I'm going, I am waiting for the best deal possible. And the package that Miami could put together versus the package that the Sixers will put together, if you put up all those players in a pile, Max is the best young talent that would be potentially going in that trade.
Yeah. And imagine, if he were, I mean, I think that would be, if Dame were just to, if he were to, like, open up his options a little bit more, and the Sixers would, be one of the teams probably that would have interest there, I'd imagine.
Right.
It's like, it's one of those things, I think, where everybody gets what they want out of it. Like, you look at what they're building there. I really like what Portland's done with their young pieces, and
they got a lot of young pieces. Yeah.
Simons, Sharp. They just drafted Scoot. They may have just had a star and a natural successor to Dame fall right on their laps, and then you add like a Tyrese Maxey into that. It could be a lot of fun in Portland, and then of course the Sixers would be getting the star player to pair with Joel, and a guy that I think is if you can make a guy in a lab that belonged in Philadelphia, Dame's one of those guys.
Yeah.
And so,
listen,
I mean,
the rap albums would, go through the roof. I'm sure.
Him and Meek Mill could get together and do something that
would be epic. But, like, to answer Mike's question, like, about the Sixers window, here's the analogy I would make. The Sixers window right now is the window in your house that doesn't stay up, and it's like propped up with like a 2x4. And Joel Embiid is that 2x4.
Yeah.
If you take him out of the equation, that thing slams shut. Yeah. And you're calling your window vendor to come out and give you new windows, because it's over. Like, you're rebuilding the whole process. And I agree, Mike, with your point about Maxey, right? Maxey is a great young player, but if you have the opportunity to flip that young player for a guy who gets you closer to making a finals run, you do that in a heartbeat. And look no further than Boston, right? Boston beat you, right? Ends up in the Eastern Conference Finals, right? They're on a finals trajectory, and they still rebuild. They flip Marcus Morris. They bring in Kristaps Porzingis. They're constantly rebuilding this roster.
Right.
you cannot stand pat and you know and to kind of look at the roster, right? When you look at the roster that they got, I don't necessarily know how much better they are as it sits right now. Because yes, did they get bigger? Right? They bring back Montrezl Harrell, which I have no clue why.
Okay.
Right? They bring
Yeah.
in Mo Bamba. Right? So you I like the talent upgrade in that sense, but you're also really big and now less athletic on the wing.
Right. Yeah. I this offseason, between the Harden stuff and which the way this is playing out, as you've said at the top of the show, it's like very this is like the worst case scenario. I think like
It screams to me like there's something else that hasn't happened
yeah, and it's like
that
who
could
knows,
potentially happen.
like who knows, like the conversations Maury's had with
Mm-hmm.
teams, and who's called about James and things like
Or
that.
Tobias, or
Yeah.
like, do you flip Tobias and PJ Tucker? Like,
Mhm.
there are a lot of moving parts, but I don't see like this league is now young and fast and athletic. And
Mm.
when I look at this roster, the only guy that fits that narrative is Maxi.
Right. Yeah.
You know, as much as Tobias Harris's dad wants to talk about him being an assassin scorer,
Yeah.
like he kind of is. He is what he is.
Right.
PJ Tucker at this stage in his career is a guy who stands in the corner
Yeah.
and gets your rebounds and is scrappy in the playoffs. DeAnthony Melton, you could potentially talk me into like him being athletic-ish,
Yeah.
but like Pat Bev is a guy that I love, but I love Pat Bev like 4 or 5 years ago.
Sure. Yeah.
So maybe he's good as like a guy who grooms a Jaden Springer, but like
Yeah. It's a weird
it's
mix. Um that's why, again, I mean, I get the penchant for wanting to hold out for, you know, hey, we're only going to change, we're only going
mhm,
to trade James for a star. I get all that. Like, I mean, I
right.
understand why you want to do that, but I mean, on July 15th, and like I'm sure you want to put it in a you want to put yourself in a position where, like, even if you don't have much leverage, you don't want like opposing teams to feel like, oh yeah, they're in a corner, they have to do whatever, because then you don't want to get pennies on the dollar for a player like James Harden. But like I said earlier, I think that like that proposed Clippers deal, I could get talked into, knowing that, like, because I like Terrence Mann, and I think Norman Powell could be useful to the Sixers. And then, as much as, and not that you're punting on the season, but it's just like you see how far Nurse can take these guys and what he can do
Yeah.
from a tactical standpoint. And then I believe, right, Tobias comes off the books. This is his last year. And then you
And
take
then
that,
there's a big free agent class, right? The free
right.
agent class next year is significantly better than the one that's this year. You've
Yeah.
got money coming off the books, but to kind of like put a bow on all this, I really like where you're going with like the Nick Nurse player development, because I
Yeah.
feel like that has been his MO as long as he's been in the league,
Yeah.
between his time in the G League and his time with the Rockets, and the time in Toronto, to look at some of these guys, right? The Pascal Siakams, the Norman Powells, the Fred Van Vliets, the getting more out of players than you would think
Hmm.
is, I think, and what I hope is the trajectory of this roster and his effect on this roster.
Sure. Yeah. Um, yeah, at this point, I would probably just take a look at, um, you know, the what you have, let Nurse do his thing for a year. I don't want to look at it like you're punting on a season. Because as long as you have Joel in his prime, you're not really punting on a season.
Right.
See how far he can take you,
Mhm.
and then reassess next summer when you have a little bit more money to play with, and maybe you can better identify what you need
Yeah.
without the James Harden element in it. Assuming that you make the trade
Mhm.
with the Clippers,
Yeah.
and then because maybe Terrence Mann is one of those guys, like that
Yeah, could be.
Nurse is like maybe one of the reasons we hear that is because um maybe I'm sure Nurse has somewhat of a say in I'm sure he's got a direct line to Morey to be like, hey,
Right.
I could do something with this kid, or you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So I don't know that, I don't have any inside knowledge, I don't know if that's happening, but it's just like I think that could be an option for them. And it's unfortunate like that it's played out like this.
Yeah.
I didn't like, I know that he's well liked, but I really don't like the Paul Reed um, contract. It's not really, it doesn't really have to do with him. I understand why people love him, and he seems like a great kid to have around, and he works hard. But that contract and the way it's structured is very,
I think they got duped.
yeah.
They got duped. I mean, I don't think. I know they got duped, right?
Mhm.
Because if they had just offered him that contract on their own, which they could have done,
Right.
I would have been okay with it, right? Because it's like a 1 year, but it's got the ability to kind of go to 3. But you almost like this screams Danny Ainge, right?
Yeah.
Because Danny Ainge goes, "How do I fuck the Sixers? Oh, I'm going to put in this kicker because Utah is a team that probably won't get out of the second round. So
Right.
for them, it would have been a 1 year deal, and he
Right.
would have gone to Utah and played for 1 year, and then they get out of the contract. But because the Sixers are in the East and they're most likely going to get out of the second round, that now guarantees all 3 years.
Right.
And
Yeah.
so that to me was like they got caught with their pants down because they weren't on the ball to be able to just offer him the contract, which he's
Right.
earned, right? He's not he's a guy who's improved, but I again I don't see where he fits on this roster because he's not a 4, he's barely a 5, he can't shoot outside,
Right.
like he rebounds erratically, he kind of spastic, like, and now you're putting him like where did those minutes go, right? Because Embiid is going to obviously get a bulk of those minutes.
Mhm.
Mo Bamba is probably going to be your first guy off the bench,
Right.
so he's the third guy that maybe gets the minutes at the 4 when Tobias Harris comes. Like, I just don't like the two of them side by side. It just
Stylistically, it's odd. And yeah, and I agree with that, and I think I actually wrote about that after,
Mhm.
um, which I was not only annoyed that they matched it, but I also had to go. Great, it's a great thing I fired up that we don't have any deadlines, because I would have been, I was waiting up to see. I was like, I wrote the piece, and then I was like, I'm gonna have to go back and correct this, because I as we got closer to midnight, I was like, they're gonna match this, and
They
when
waited
they
till what, like about quarter of midnight?
yeah, so I had to go back in and correct, and so it didn't look dated, and um the contract itself, like you said, he earned it, no doubt. I'm not knocking the player for getting the money, but
Right.
it's they, like you said, they could have done that at any time. And again, there's a hard hidden wrinkle to it, that like this is taking up so much of the off season for the Sixers,
Yeah.
and their players are getting their players are getting offer sheets and things like that, and it
Mhm.
just, it almost feels like all your attention's over here,
Yeah.
and other teams are kind of looking around, looking at it, and they're saying, maybe we should throw an offer sheet, we kind of like Ball Reed, and they
Right.
do it, And yeah, stylistically, it's a weird fit. I think the thing that really kind of bugs me about the deal is the fact that I think the Sixers are now over the tax with it. And so, there's overages they have to pay and things like that. And for a team where they are, and they haven't really proven to us that they're legitimate contenders as much as we like to say that they could be. Like, I don't like being over that. Like, I don't like pushing.
Well, I kind of looked at it from a different perspective.
Okay.
I feel like they kind of knew that when they were building this roster that they were going to have to go over that threshold at some point.
Right.
So I think this was just like, all right, well, we know we're going to get there anyway. They know that in building this roster, they're going to have to pay guys over the max. They're going to have to go over that threshold.
Right.
So maybe this now that they've gone through past that threshold, maybe that just gives them the flexibility to be like, well, fuck it. We're already over. We're already paying tax anyway. Like, let's just do what we got to do to build this roster out.
Right.
So either way, man, I think that's
fair.
It's been a very frustrating offseason. But I don't think that this team I still think they're in like the top 4 or 5 of the East, which still puts them in a really good spot in the playoffs. And the thing that I heard Nick Nurse talking, he was on somebody's show, somebody's podcast, but talking about this team that you see now is not the team that's going to go into training camp. So that kind of leads me to believe that kind of Daryl Morey's got something else going on. He's got something else in the books. So I feel like what we're talking, the roster that we're talking about now, it maybe looks kind of stupid and weird because it's incomplete as compared to where it will be when the season starts.
Right. Yeah. And I think, with that, the better, like kind of like we've been saying about Harden today is like, you want to, with the new coaching staff and everything like that, I think you really want to get this done as early as possible for a litany of reasons. But one of the reasons is that you're bringing in a new coaching staff and you want them to have the full, camp to help mold this roster and let everybody know. So there's not that, you do those things in season and guys got to like get comfortable playing with each other. It takes a couple weeks, for guys to understand what another guy does and stuff like that and how you fit into the offense and all those kinds of things. So I don't, that sounds about right. I'm sure he has good knowledge on that, good intel on that. And so I'll believe that. But yeah, it's been a rough off season so far, I think, for the Sixers. But I do think that they're, like you said, they're still in that top 4 in the East. And things are changing too, right? Like we mentioned Boston just briefly, and they moved Marcus Smart, and he was a part of what they did there. And I think they have to figure out that Jaylen Brown thing. Do you max him, or do they want to be that he's going to get the max regardless? But it's like, do you want to be the team that does it? And they bring in Porzingis. I'm not necessarily sure how that's going to work, but we'll see. And Miami's kind of like still, they're still squeezing blood out of a stone there, and they're still. Listen,
they got that heat culture is real.
The heat culture is real for sure. So, and Milwaukee's going to run it back. So we'll see what happens with them.
Yeah. Wow. Well, listen, we're going to play some commercials, but on the other side of the commercials, if you're still hanging out, we're going to talk some hockey. So hang around and we'll be right back.
Von C Brewing Company is a 20-barrel, 16,000 square foot microbrewery with a 2,500 square foot tasting room, including a spacious outside beer garden in Norristown, PA, in the heart of Montgomery County. The Von C family is part of the family that started C. Schmidt and Son Brewing in 1860. Stop in Wednesday through Sunday and taste a variety of draft and 16-ounce cans of originally brewed beer and tell them the Drunk on Broad crew sent you. Vonsey Brewing is located at 1210 Stenbridge Street, Suite 300 in Norristown. Cheers.
Team Clicks are the only glasses for real sports fans. With interchangeable arms, you can support all of your favorite teams, or even make and create custom options as well. These die-hard sports fans have realized that sports fans needed something other than face paint to show their love and passion for their teams. Go to teamclicks.com/DOB and show your love for your hometown team.
La Torrens curated collection of men's and women's watches is a perfect investment that lasts for years to come and fits perfectly with your every outfit and style. Our range of classic watches aren't just a great perfect formal and casual accessory, but a time machine that takes you back to memories. Explore our collection of timeless watches that can reflect your taste, personality, and personal style. Our exclusive collection of carefully curated, affordable luxury watches is what you need to make a personalized style statement. You can take pride in your prized possession, handing it over to the next generations as your most loved asset that they can also own and display with the same pride. These high-quality pieces stand the test of time, giving exceptional value and return on your investment. Go to la-touraine.com and use code DOB at checkout and get 10% off.
If you're looking for unique sports apparel, check out Streaker Sports. They've dug deep into the archives and have brought back some incredible defunct team logos and have even created entire defunct league collections. They also have collections paying homage to sports culture, including the Miracle on Ice, Slap Shot, Caddyshack, the Mighty Ducks, and even have a license with Wiffle Ball and USA Hockey. Only for Drunk on Broad listeners, use code BROAD at checkout to get 10% off anything at streakersports.com. Again, that's 10% off anything at streakersports.com with discount code BROAD.
Wow, what a fake off Daniels as he broke his ankles and got all the way to the cup.
Well, we're in for volume 23 of Drunk on Ice. Mark, talk to me about the Flyers. We're just going to jump right in. The Flyers draft class, right? Last time you and I were on together was the monster fired up draft show. By the way, kudos. You held it. You held it down for what amounted to, I think, about 3.5 hours of draft coverage, which was very impressive. It was the fired up draft-a-thon.
Yeah.
But no, that was a ton of fun to hop on for those things.
Yeah, it was. Thanks for joining me. It was that was a bear. I didn't think it was gonna be. I was like, oh, maybe the first round, maybe it's 2 hours. But we went an additional hour, and so and some change, I think. So it was pretty long, but yeah, I appreciate you joining me. So that was a lot of fun.
And Mike, I love this idea. The morning Drunk on Ice show is called the Morning Skate. I love
morning
that.
Skate, yeah.
That's gonna have to be they may have to be like an opening segment. The Morning Skate. I love it.
Perfect. Yeah.
I love that. Oh, and Mike, listen, let's not hold the coffee here, right?
Yeah.
You are not the only one that cannot stop watching the Matvey Michkov highlights from straight out of Russia. I don't want anything from Russia, but I want this guy from Russia, man.
Yeah.
The stuff that we're seeing online, man. And now I feel like we're getting inundated with the highlights that we would have never seen had he not been drafted here.
Yeah.
But good God, you cannot be anything. If you're watching those things and you're not impressed, I'm questioning your hockey knowledge.
Yeah, he's really special. And I think on draft night, and our live reaction is on the fired up little clip there of when they took him. And it's one of those things leading up to, all throughout, going back to last summer, and the terminology used by the Flyers was this, we need high-end talent. And after the season that we saw, they definitely need an injection of that. Everybody knows that Flyers are in a rebuild. So when they took him, I think there's this feeling of like, yeah, we're waiting for him. He's under contract in the KHL for 3 years.
3 more years, yeah.
But when he gets here, you're not getting like your typical aged prospect as much as you are a ready, he's like pre-cooked, like he's already going to be he's coming as ready as a star.
Yeah, and, you're talking about a kid who's and I'm sure Mike's all over this, right? But the comparisons to Ovechkin coming out of Russia from his coaches, from former players,
yeah,
and he's going to be hitting, in 2 to 3 years, could be right on the upswing of this rebuild, right? Where they're going to play young guys for the next couple years.
Mm-hmm.
So that they're going to be picking in the top end of the draft for the next couple years. So here's a great chance for Danny Briere, for Keith Jones to kind of stockpile that youth and create just a larger talent pool of players. Good God, man. I love where that's just going to hit. Like it's going to hit right in stride with like when these guys, right, your Carter Gauthiers, right, your guys that are in your farm system now, it seems like they're all going to kind of converge all right around the same time, and they're going to be young.
Right. And that's really the exciting part for all of this with Michkov. And I think from what I've seen, highlights and things like that, he reminds me a lot of Nikita Kucherov from the Tampa Bay Lightning.
Ooh, okay.
And, another Russian star player in the league. And that, like, he's just, like, this is like the most excited Flyers fans have been in a long time. And I think, like, when we look at where the team is and how, how he fits into that future planning in 3 years. You mentioned Cutter Gauthier. He'll be here soon. And then everybody else, it becomes, like, if you're one of the people that believe in a draft, to take the biggest swing possible, Michkov on a pure talent perspective, the only rival he has in terms of like pure offensive ability in his draft class is Connor Bedard, the census #1 overall pick.
Yeah.
With everything else going on in Russia, this kid falls to 7 for the Flyers, and it already feels like where it always kind of felt maybe in the past that the Flyers were one of the teams that kind of missed the boat on that guy. They took that guy in this draft, the guy that, maybe in a year's time, you're looking back at it and you're like, wow. Like,
how did he fall to 7?
How did he get
right? And I think what you're saying, like they have always traditionally taken the safer route.
Mm-hmm.
They've taken they very rarely take the road less traveled. They're always taking the plan where even though they know they might be taking a guy who's less talented, they know that it's safer because they're still going to get an NHL ready player. I think this is a clear delineation between the Flyers of old and this, not to be kind of corny, but this new age of orange, right? This this, I think, we could look back on this in 3, 5, 10 years and see this draft as like an inflection point to say we're going in a different route. And that's refreshing to see. I think that's why the Flyers have kind of rejuvenated this fan base, because this fan base kind of was like dead because they had no idea about what was going on. It seemed like the transactions, the moves, the stuff that, it seems like Danny Briere has taken this first, year of being in this role to kind of undo a lot of the Chuck Fletcher stuff. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with just kind of like cut bait, move on, get this process started so that we can rejuvenate this roster and look at it from a very different perspective.
Yeah. And, you go back to when they hired John Tortorella, and one of the things Tortorella said at the time was that this past season was going to be a year where, the Flyers found out who was going to be a part of the plan and who wasn't. And then you look at the way the offseason had played out. Kevin Hayes was moved along. The Flyers traded him for peanuts, but it was clear he wasn't happy here. They buy out Tony DeAngelo yesterday. And then of course
in a what ended up being a very, very weird scenario.
That was bizarre. We'll have to jump into
that. Like on the surface, it seemed pretty simple. Like it seemed like it was like, okay, you want this guy, great. We'll take either a guy or a pick or something. Like how you can't just kind of like settle on like any guy in your farm system or like a future draft pick, or like how many times do we see trades that have like somebody gets traded for future considerations and then they figure it out later.
Right.
And then it seemed but I was also okay with it because Danny Briere was like, done. Like we're moving on.
Yeah. It's about I think the buyout's 1.5 or 1.6 over the next 2 seasons. That'll be on their books. It gives them immediate cap relief, of course, in the first year of buying them out. But it's not, 1.5 of dead cap space isn't terrible, not for 2 years, especially when you're in a multi-year process like the Flyers are. It's really not a bad thing. And plus, it opens up, from a roster configuration standpoint, it opens up. The Flyers are going to be young on the blue line next year. And it opens up a spot. He clearly wasn't a fit here. Him and John Tortorella seemed as though they had some issues. And, so they took care of that. And then, of course, the Ivan Provorov trade, which I don't think was really a Tortorella-led charge. I think John Tortorella really respected Ivan Provorov's game. I think it was more that Provy didn't want to be here anymore. I think he was upset with the direction of things and the losing, and I'm sure that plays a factor for everybody, especially a player that seems to pride himself on being competitive. I think that was really rough for Ivan, and they move him along in a deal that was probably the best trade Briere has made this offseason.
Right.
And the other ones weren't, the Kevin Hayes trade and things like that, they weren't, it wasn't about the future or what you were getting in the deal as much as it was, just simply opening up the roster space and moving the player along.
Right.
And, I think some of those moves will be addition by subtraction for them.
Yeah, absolutely.
They'll open up some space for guys to compete for roles. The Flyers were a little bit more active, I think, in free agency than I expected them to be.
Okay.
And I really like Garrett Hathaway. I think he's a useful bottom 6 player. Ryan Pohling's a pretty good 4th line center. Those guys are going to fill the bottom end of the lineup, and they created a little bit of internal competition too with the blue line.
I mean, listen, you bring in a veteran like Mark Stahl, right?
Mark
Which,
Stahl.
you know, I think, you know, you can't have a ton of young guys without having a veteran guy that lets you know, like, how to operate in the NHL. So I think, you know, the Mark Stahl move to me is, you know, a move that, like, didn't make sense on the surface, but kind of when you dig a little deeper, like, you need a veteran in there. You can't have a bunch of young kids that are all trying to figure it out at the same time.
Yeah, and that's a good point. And like we were talking, you know, when we did our Sixers show, just
Yeah.
pre-break or before the break, similar to like the Pat Bev signing for the Sixers. I
Okay.
think
Yeah, I like that analogy.
for Mark Stahl, he's more of like, it's really not what he's going to bring to the ice. I mean, Mark Stahl's an older player now. He's not the player he once was, but you know, veteran of over 1,000 NHL games, played, you know, just came off a Stanley Cup run with the Florida Panthers. You know, if nothing else, he can be a voice in that dressing room.
Yeah.
You know, and for some of those young defensemen and you know, maybe a guy to lean on. He played for John Tortorella as well. So in the past with the Rangers. So sometimes I think it's good to have that you know, having players that had played for a coach before in that mix where they can kind of, sometimes that message coming from a teammate, you know, is a little bit more easily digestible for
Right.
another player, you know, especially if it's like a sharp message and you're getting like, you know, he's tearing the paint off the walls type of thing. And
Yeah.
and you're like, kind of like, what's this dude's problem? And like, and you know, your teammate's like, well, you know, like, this is what he's expecting from him. You know what I mean? Like, it
Right.
becomes kind of like one of those things. So that's a good element of it. They signed Victor Mete. He'll come out for the team. I think he's on a 2-year deal at defenseman.
Yeah, it's a 1 year, 2-way contract, right? And then they're also, you know, the Noah Cates and Cam York, right? They get those deals done. Yeah, they bring in all of this, and okay, I'm cool with all of it because you're gonna spend the next and I like that they all are on the same page. Keith Jones, Danny Briere, you know, the entire coaching staff. You're getting a consistent message, which if you're in this rebuild, you are going to need the message to be clear and consistent from top to bottom. And that's the thing that I love about where the offseason has been, where the draft class is coming through. Like, to me, it just makes a ton of sense to be able to kind of operate this way.
Yeah. And it does. It feels like a real clear, concise message that everybody's on board with leading up to this point, going in the camp. And, you know, I think right now the only restricted free agent not signed is Morgan Frost, which now with the Tony DeAngelo buyout, they'll be able to get him under contract. And they'll be ready to roll for the season. And I think the pieces fit a little bit better than maybe they did before. You know, a returning Sean Couturier to the lineup, a returning Cam Atkinson. I think those guys are more John Tortorella players than, say, you know, a Kevin Hayes and a Tony DeAngelo, so the pieces fit better.
Right. Yeah,
so,
I mean, there's still watchable talent. They are not going. They're in the process of rebuilding the roster, but this roster is going to be young, but it's not going to be like process Sixers roster.
Yeah,
like it's not going to be like, let's get the 12 worst guys we can get under contract. Like I still believe that people are going to be really into watching Owen Tippett, right? I think people are going to be into watching, you know, the Konechny's and like the Cam Atkinsons. You're still, the Couturier is still, you know, a Flyers, you know, I'm going to put it in air quotes, but a branded player. Like, he's a guy that people identify with this. And I think you're probably going to see attendance, you know, you're going to see the attendance spike. You're going to see it go up because of the message that's being kind of dispersed that like, give us some time, but we
Right.
got you.
Right. And I think that was the biggest part of, any kind of fractured trust between the Flyers and their fan base.
Mm-hmm.
I think a big overarching point that was happening there was that the Flyers were very, it felt like there was things were all over the place. It didn't feel like there was a real plan, even if there was. The messaging and the communication part of that was not great. So now I think like, that's what's different and cool and unique about hockey in Philadelphia is that if you give us a clear plan and a team that, cares, even if they're short on talent, people will come out and they'll want to see them. So it's
here's the message. If you're an athlete coming into this town, play hard, be honest. The city, you do those two things, and this city will love you. We are forever the city that loves like the last guy on the bench that comes in and tries really hard.
Right.
And we'll make cases for that guy to be in the starting lineup, even though he does not belong there. So like, let's not make this complicated. Play hard, care, and be honest, and you're going to be okay in this town.
Right. Yeah. And it's a lot of those things are really kind of hallmarks too of like, I think back at some of the most beloved Flyers teams. That was always something that I think all of those teams had in common was that they were all kind of bring your lunch pail to work kind of teams. And the city really resonates with that. And I think the Flyers in the past have always been a good representation of Philadelphians that way. And I think that's why people feel the way they do about them. So it's a good thing for the team coming into this season. It feels like there's a plan in place and it's well communicated at this point. And, we'll see what happens when camp starts, then we'll get down to the nuts and bolts of, who's going to play with who and what line and all that other stuff, all that fun stuff. So we'll get into that in a couple months,
Yeah, absolutely. And listen, just to go back to the draft for half a second.
Yeah.
You're right. They take Oliver Bonk at the back end of the first round, which, you're taking the son of a former NHL player. So that there's some pedigree there in terms of his father, Radek Bonk. The next two picks were the picks that really sent up the red flags in conjunction with another player transaction.
Yes.
Which is at 51 and 87. In two consecutive picks, they take two goaltenders.
Yes.
And they've also obtained the contract of the goalie that they've been stashing in Russia.
Mm-hmm.
What does this tell you about Carter Hart?
Yeah, it's a really, the
because that's a big investment.
It is. It is.
Yeah,
and
we're not talking about 7th round, right? We're talking about the 51st pick and the guy that they get, Carson Bjornsson, is essentially what we thought was going to be the number one goaltender. So I get that there's value there.
Right.
But to take two guys consecutively and you're bringing Fedotov,
there's a lot of, a lot of this has to do, it's really right now there's reports dropping now being reported about the Hockey Canada investigation from 2019. Carter Hart was on that junior team, and there's more and more coming out about it now. We don't know any names, but apparently that's coming soon. And it's really kind of like there's a lot of players on that team.
Yeah.
That I don't know if their names have been involved in trade discussions, but there are guys that are kind of still floating out there, like Max Comtois, who was an Anaheim Duck. He was on that team. He seems like somebody that a team would have taken a just from a pure hockey perspective, an NHL team would have taken a look at. He's unsigned still, and I think
Okay.
that kind of shows us, I don't know if his name's coming up and things or whatever, but when it comes to the Flyers and the goaltending thing, I'm a big believer in always drafting goalies because they're so difficult to project.
Mhm.
That having a bunch of them in your system isn't a bad thing. And the guys that they took in this draft, they'll be a couple years away, but it does look like they're preparing for life without Carter Hart.
Yeah.
And regardless of whether that's the case or not, it certainly appears that way. In addition to those draft picks, I mean, they acquired a goalie this year, this offseason, in Cal Peterson, who's going to be
Yeah.
probably on the roster, I'd imagine. And then we saw Sam Ersson last year. He played well. Felix Sandstrom's still around too. So it's like
There's a lot of guys.
There's a lot of goalies, and
there's only one net. Like,
yeah,
it's not like a position like center, forward, right? Any of those on ice positions. You're talking about a position on your roster where you're going to carry two, maybe
yeah,
three.
If you have to, you carry three.
But like, I get what you're saying. It just, to me, it screams like exactly what you were saying. At some point, I just don't know when it is. I don't know when that shoe drops where they commit to say, this is the peak of where his talent is going to give us the most value in return.
Right.
And they just decide to kind of move on. I don't know if that's mid-year trade, like if that's like a deadline trade where somebody, is making a cup run and they need a young, talented kid. I don't know. I don't want to move on from him, because at the same time, in 3 years, when this talent pool kind of circles back, he's still going to be young. Like, he'll be what, 27, 28?
Yeah.
When this roster is going to start making that upswing back.
Yeah.
Which is right in that neighborhood where goalies kind of like hit their stride.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's a big part of it here, is like, that's why I think I've also said in the past on these shows, and I've said with Mike on Fired Up, that I think I would walk Carter Hart up to his UFA year and reassess where you are. Just because, you don't want to lose an asset for nothing. You never want to. In an ideal situation, you don't want to lose an asset for nothing. But it doesn't always work out that way either. Sometimes things happen and plans change. But I wonder, this Hockey Canada investigation looms large over the NHL as a whole right now. I think a lot of people are bracing for the worst here, and
how bad do you think it's going to be?
I think it's got to be pretty bad. I mean, the report that came out yesterday had said something as many as like 8 players. You're talking about like 8 players of a 22-man roster, and I mean, like, the odds aren't good if you were, you know what I mean? If you're on that team, and
I mean, you're essentially talking about like about a third of the roster.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's really, it's concerning, and it deserves the utmost, seriousness, and I can understand why it puts everything in a holding pattern for players that were a part of those teams. It'll be interesting once it kind of comes, if Carter Hart's not a part of it and there's no legal, he's not involved in any kind of situation, then it'll be interesting to see really if that trade stuff ends up picking back up.
That's true, yeah.
You know, because I don't think anybody's going to acquire any player who were on those teams, whether they were involved or not.
Right.
With this thing kind of looming over the whole league, you don't want to then
Yeah.
acquire somebody who then is going to be involved. Is likely going to get suspended, and then is going to be involved in a court case. It seems very that doesn't seem like a risk anybody's willing to inherit at this point. If you already have a player that was, a part of the investigation. So,
yeah. Listen, Mark, anything you wanna jump on before we head out?
Nothing much.
I think I'd be remiss if we didn't bring up the press conference.
Yeah.
Okay, so part of me also said when this whole thing happens the other day, why are we still doing Zoom press conferences?
Right.
Like, can we not just like fly the guy in?
Yeah.
I don't even care. You got to pay for a coach. Like, fly the guy in, sit him in front, have him answer questions, fly him home. Why are we like? I get why we did it for that whole stretch of time, but you can fly the guy in. Like,
sure.
It might cost you a couple $100 to fly the guy in. Like,
Yeah.
come on. But that being said, right, and if you missed the audio from this, right, and forgive me, Mark, who were they interviewing at the time?
It was Garrett Hathaway. And
Okay.
I believe the reporter was Gina Hahn from the Inquirer was the one that asked.
So Gina Hahn asks a question very pertinent to what, I'm sure that you've been in those situations, right, where you're asking guys questions. You're trying to angle it for a story that you're probably, you're trying to write in a certain way.
Mm-hmm.
And then the mics are like molten lava. They're hot.
Yeah.
And they pick up somebody on the Flyers end who's essentially like talking shit about the team, going, how many times are we going to fucking answer this question?
Yeah. Yeah.
And talking about the Flyers not being good. Right. And we know all that. The Flyers have been very transparent about that.
Right.
Like, if you're the reporter, how do you handle that?
It's a weird situation.
Right.
I have not been on too many, like I've been on a couple Zoom press conference calls. I've never like asked a question during one, so I'm not really sure how that, but you do get like, you could ask a question. Like, that's the thing. Do you remember a couple years ago, I believe it was the Deshaun Watson thing? He was asked a question.
Vaguely, yes.
He was asked a question, and I mean, like, the reporter got dragged online for what a dumb question people thought it was. And Deshaun Watson gave this really detailed, really good answer. And the question itself, the question Gina asked was not like when a new player comes in and you're in the situation that like the Flyers are asking that player why Philadelphia, why the Flyers when they're in this position, why would you want to come here? Is a fair question to ask. It's a bit of a softball, but softball questions aren't necessarily bad questions. I don't think they shouldn't have the negative.
You don't ever know what they're going to say. You don't know what they're going to share about why. It could be a relationship with a former player, staffer.
Sure.
It could be just that they have a desire to be part of a rebuild. Like, you don't know. And that's essentially why you ask those open-ended questions, because you don't know, what that response is going to be. But I thought the way that the Flyers handled it was like right on point to say, like,
they jumped right on it. Yeah.
And that is a good sign that they're not waiting for those things to kind of like, they got out ahead of it before social media and anything else got a chance to like kind of drag them through the mud a little bit.
Yeah. And it was one of those things too, where, the person on the media relations side or whoever it was, on that call that said those things. And there was 2 people, I believe. There was a girl's voice that was like, "Why would you want to come here? The Flyers suck," or something.
Right.
And it's like, I'm assuming they're young, the people that were on the, and it's
you can only imagine, right?
You learn
they're
from
wet
it.
behind the ears a little bit.
I actually, at my previous job, I had an instance like that. Actually, I was on a call for work, and I was like in an editorial role at the time, and I'm on the call, and I'm sitting there, and I don't realize my mic's like on, right? And it wasn't anything derogatory, but it was like there was a younger reporter that looked young on the call, and he was running through story ideas, and my girlfriend was sitting next to me, and she said like, "Oh, who is that?" And I'm like, "Oh yeah, this is our junior reporter," and he's like legit, like he's been around. He probably worked there longer than I had, And then another reporter jumps on, and he had purple hair. So I made his hair was dyed purple.
Right.
So I made a comment about it, and then someone comes over like, "Hey, Mark, your mic's on," and I was like, "Oh my god!" Like I thought I was gonna lose my job. Like it wasn't bad, but it was a lesson.
Yeah.
It was a lesson learned.
Yeah, you hope that they use it as a learning experience, but it becomes a teachable moment, but it's teachable in the way where I'm sure they probably got the "don't do that shit again."
yeah, I'm sure they heard about it, and it's just it's the age too. Like you were saying about the Zoom calls and stuff, and still doing the Zoom calls. It's just like the age we live in now, like the technical age of just and those things are potential. Those things can happen, and
absolutely.
And so it was treated with the right kind of tone, I think, and the Flyers addressed it, and I'm sure those media relations or whoever it was on the call, I'm sure they got a talking to about it, and it was
sure they got a Zoom 101, how to turn your mic off.
Yeah, so but it was it was funny. It wasn't like and the question itself, I was going to mention too about the question at what we were just saying about the question and things like that. Those kind of like softball questions also give a player, and I think a lot of players and athletes appreciate that, is that sometimes those softball questions allow you to kind of like maybe pander to the audience a little bit. Oh, I signed with the Flyers because, of the city and the organization, and like it kind of gives you a chance to kind of talk it up a little bit. And I think the players in those instances, it helps you develop a rapport with the team or the you're probably in the players' good graces for doing that and not just coming out with like these super hard questions. I do think there's a method to that badness there, where you're at sometimes softball questions kind of just gives you an opportunity to maybe ask a follow-up or whatever the case is.
Absolutely.
In that instance. So it's not necessarily a bad thing.
Oh, well, Mark, next time we'll talk, we'll I'm sure the roster will look slightly, maybe a little bit different. We'll talk, we'll kind of reconnect, but it's been cool kind of connecting on the hockey scene, but we'll go check out all of our stuff, check out the links, check out the link tree with all the sponsors, go check out their good stuff, and be on the lookout for some content. We're going to split this video up into a couple different segments. So but go outside, have a great weekend, everybody. And we'll catch you later.
Peace.
Von C Brewing Company is a 20-barrel, 16,000 square foot microbrewery with a 2,500 square foot tasting room, including a spacious outside beer gardens in Norristown, PA, in the heart of Montgomery County. The Von C family is part of the family that started C. Schmidt and Son Brewing in 1860. Stop in Wednesday through Sunday and taste a variety of draft and 16-ounce cans of originally brewed beer and tell them the Drunk on Broad crew sent you. Vonsey Brewing is located at 1210 Stenbridge Street, Suite 300 in Norristown. Cheers.
Team Clicks are the only glasses for real sports fans. With interchangeable arms, you can support all of your favorite teams, or even make and create custom options as well. These die-hard sports fans have realized that sports fans needed something other than face paint to show their love and passion for their teams. Go to teamclicks.com/DOB and show your love for your hometown team.
La Torrens curated collection of men's and women's watches is a perfect investment that lasts for years to come and fits perfectly with your every outfit and style. Our range of classic watches aren't just a great perfect formal and casual accessory, but a time machine that takes you back to memories. Explore our collection of timeless watches that can reflect your taste, personality, and personal style. Our exclusive collection of carefully curated, affordable luxury watches is what you need to make a personalized style statement. You can take pride in your prized possession, handing it over to the next generations as your most loved asset that they can also own and display with the same pride. These high-quality pieces stand the test of time, giving exceptional value and return on your investment. Go to la-touraine.com and use code DOB at checkout and get 10% off.
If you're looking for unique sports apparel, check out Streaker Sports. They've dug deep into the archives and have brought back some incredible defunct team logos and have even created entire defunct league collections. They also have collections paying homage to sports culture, including the Miracle on Ice, Slap Shot, Caddyshack, the Mighty Ducks, and even have a license with Wiffle Ball and USA Hockey. Only for Drunk on Broad listeners, use code BROAD at checkout to get 10% off anything at streakersports.com. Again, that's 10% off anything at streakersports.com with discount code BROAD.